Welcome to Deep History, the podcast that uncovers the hidden stories, strange side notes, and lesser known facts behind the events and people you thought you knew. I'm Lee, and together with my partner Bob, we'll dig into the overlooked corners of history, the stuff they left out of the textbooks, and bring the past to life in a whole new way. So grab your shovel, it's time to dig deep.
And I think we're recording. You want to do an introduction?
We're live?
Somewhat. I'm a little tired today, so I'm not entirely sure, but yes.
This podcast is recorded live in front of a very disinterested audience.
Yeah, there's no one here.
Well, not yet. It's early.
Yeah.
But I anticipate this place is going to get packed. We're in a really cool spot today.
Where are we?
So today we are at Culpeper Cattle Company in Deep Ellum. We're going to get into a little bit more about why we happen to be at that particular location. But first, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. You know, it's been some time since our last podcast, which is very surprising because we're both such hard workers and, you know, we're so enthusiastic that we wouldn't have been pushing out more casts.
Right. Yeah.
But here we are, and we're in January, right?
It's barely. I mean, when I say barely, it's more February. We're at January 31st.
Oh, so we still made it.
We did. So when he says made it, our goal this year is 12 podcasts. So what do? We wait until January 1st to get the first one knocked out.
Right.
But here's there's a little bit of gray area here because we didn't clearly define whether or not we wanted to record 12 podcasts or if we want to actually publish 12 podcasts. Right. So we're going to live in that gray area like we always do.
Yeah, we like gray. So Lee is the answer that through the course of today, we'll record 12 podcasts and then we'll have them set up for the rest of the year.
Good God, no.
All right. So let's get through this one, I guess.
Exactly. We're going to go one at a time.
So to interrupt you, as I always do, we're at Culpeper, right? So this place has some history to it as well, right? Before we're obviously in Deep Ellum. We got to explain Deep Ellum.
It does? Yep.
Okay. Do we know what it is?
We do know what it is, but I think we probably ought to set the table from a Deep Ellum standpoint.
Oh, thank you. All right, yes,
to begin with, because we've got listeners not only throughout Texas and the country, but around the world.
Hard to believe.
We want to make sure to set the table with regard to exactly what Deep Ellum is. So, Deep Ellum is one of Dallas's most recognized cultural districts. I
agree with that.
Tons of live music venues. There's lots of great street art, bars, restaurants, and older industrial buildings that have been repurposed.
Right.
So we happen to be sitting. Culpeper Cattle Company is in one of those repurposed industrial buildings. But before Deep Ellum became a place where you would go to hear live music or grab some late night sushi or whatever you may be doing, it was something entirely different.
So currently today, you would think Deep Ellum is known mostly. It's a younger crowd most of the time, right?
Agreed.
Or I assume it's a mix during the course of the day, but it's always, in my day, which spans hundreds of years, it was more recently. It was no more like a younger crowd would come down here for partying, and it was a kind of a hip place, right? And underground may be a little extreme, but it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's over the years, it's gone edgy, commercial, dangerous.
Right,
edgy, commercial,
right,
dangerous.
Right. It's a cycle.
It's gone through multiple cycles, and evolutions in its personality. I tell you, I spent the 90s, dating myself, but I spent the 90s here in Deep Ellum, going to see amazing bands.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
I spent, for those of you that may remember Art Bar, the Art Bar complex, I spent an evening partying with Dennis Rodman at Art Bar.
Oh my goodness!
So
and you and Dennis were both very athletic, had a lot in common on that
clearly
front.
Yes,
Maybe you had more similarities in other areas. We don't need a deep dive in on that.
Wow, that's
well, I'm a
Easter
fan
egg.
of Dennis.
That's an Easter egg.
To be
some
clear,
of you may get, others may not. But Bob was just working blue there, and it's not immediately apparent.
No, I'm a fan of Dennis.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a character. So let's talk a little bit about what Deep Ellum was before it became the cultural district that it is today. So grab your shovel. It's time to dig deep.
Okay.
So before we get into the blues legends and the neon clubs and all that sort of stuff, Deep Ellum was not necessarily cool, right? At the beginning, it was industrial. It was not a cultural district. The reason that Deep Ellum came into being, well, let me ask you, do you know why?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to share that knowledge that you have.
Well, let me throw
get
more
to
into
stab
that.
at it.
Okay, yes, I understand. There
I will
was
shred you if you were wrong.
no, I
so-
guarantee you, I'm always right. So my understanding is, it was an intersection of two of the primary railroad
Damn
lines
it, you're right.
in 1872 and 1873.
Are you reading my notes?
Yes.
You are clearly reading my notes.
No, I'm not, but that was
Okay.
the extent of my research. So I wanted to get that one right. So it was primarily what it just so happens these railroads intersected at this particular point
Yep.
in Deep Ellum and Lee. We are Deep Ellum from a geographical context.
Just east of downtown.
Okay, so we're
Dallas.
we're in. Some people consider this downtown Dallas as
Yeah.
well. We know it's kind of on the fringe.
Yep.
But okay, all right.
Absolutely right. And
All
so those two railroads that you mentioned, 1872, the Houston and Texas Central Railroad came into Dallas,
Okay.
and that ran north and south.
Okay.
The Texas and Pacific Railroad comes in 1873, and it runs east and west.
That makes sense. Texas Pacific. Right.
So before you know it, we are able to ship goods both north, south, east, well, both, all north, south, east, and west directions. So
Logistically-
the Deep Ellum district
yeah.
became, and you used the perfect word. Deep Ellum was originally about logistics. That's the reason that this place really started to gain a little bit of a head of steam. And stuff could be moved very quickly. It could be moved very cheaply.
Wow.
So that's how this place started to blow up, this Deep Ellum area. So people start arriving in Dallas. We've got formerly enslaved folks. We've
Right.
got European immigrants. We've got laborers of all kinds.
Right.
And they found work
Because
in those rail yards.
that this convergence of these railroad lines really drove commerce, and so that became an attraction for a variety of people who needed work, make a living.
Absolutely, and more so as the workforce began to blossom here in the Deep Ellum area. The stores and small businesses that provide goods and services to a community began
Right.
to pop up as well.
Right.
So as you drive down, say, Commerce or Elm Street here in the Deep Ellum area, you will see there's a bunch of older buildings, and those
Yeah,
are the
you can see
storefronts
this.
that
It's-
used to provide those
Right.
goods and services.
It feels like it has that theme. Most buildings seem to be, other than the apartments now that have grown, but most buildings seem to be more of an industrial feel to it, or maybe
Exposed brick, and
Right.
it's
right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, without
Okay.
a doubt. And
All right.
again, Culpeper Cattle Company, where we are right now, and I'm going to reveal what its purpose was back in the early days of Deep Ellum. Culpeper Cattle Company is no different than all
Yeah.
of those. You see, I mean, these are original hardwood floors that they have in here. They've re-scraped them. We've got exposed
wow.
brick all over the place. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a gorgeous building, and the time, effort, and care that they put into revitalizing it
I
is
can only
evident.
imagine.
It's
Right.
evident.
Right.
They did
It
a
makes
great
it makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
And it fits kind of with the theme of Deep Ellum, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so okay.
So Deep Ellum, you just said it. Ellum.
Right.
Where the hell does that come from, right?
Do you want the answer?
Do you know?
Are you
the answer?
testing me?
I am testing it. You're exactly
Yes, of course. You see, it's the second test question.
right. It is.
All right. So there was such a convergence of people of different origins and locations that because of that, they had different dialects. And a lot of these dialects were either Southern or European. And, you had that kind of influence, and people would say that they were on Elm Street. Elm is one of the primary streets that runs through downtown Dallas and then extends into this area. And the way they would say it, because of those different dialects, it kind of rolled into this Ellum. So I do the same thing with my hillbilly background, right?
Yep.
So you get Deep Ellum. So from Elm, it moved into the Ellum label. Did I get this right?
You so far you are batting 1,000.
I'd love
You've
to
got
challenge
two
you
questions
and win.
I'd even give you extra credit for knowing 1872 and 1873 for the railroads.
yeah.
But I also, again, you were either looking over my shoulder and saw my notes, or
I looked at that 2 minutes before this podcast started. I said, I'm going to remember this.
That's fair. Well, it stuck. It stuck, and it did well. But, again, before we move on, I do want to reiterate, Deep Ellum's very first function, Bob called it out, was logistics. It wasn't designed to be a cultural district. It wasn't about art. It wasn't about nightlife.
Right.
It was about the logistics that came with the intersection of two railway systems.
And that made it very attractive to a variety of different people and different cultures. I had also read something, Lee, that there was in the early 1900s, there was a boll weevil epidemic of the cotton farms in East Texas and Louisiana.
Sure. Yep.
So a lot of the workers, a lot of them, African American sharecroppers and others, obviously that depleted their opportunity to work. And that also drove a lot of the African American community, part of that, into this area within Deep Ellum. So that's my nugget for the day.
Excellent.
Hope you
So you're
appreciate
done.
it. I'm finished, man.
So the rest of the podcast is going to be me.
Hey, it's
everyone.
buffet time for me, bud.
Oh, and they do. Yeah, buffet time. So they've got a fantastic buffet here at Culpeper on the weekends. So you should check it out.
Yes.
We haven't eaten yet, but we're going to right after this.
Yep.
But so, Bob, let's talk about some of that industrial growth. So we've all heard of John Deere tractors, but back in the late 1800s, when Deep Ellum was really starting to become a thing,
Right.
its real claim to fame was the Continental Gin Company.
Okay.
That's not gin the spirits.
Oh, never.
That is
I'm
gin
not
like
interested.
Cotton gins. You
Okay.
mentioned cotton just a moment ago.
Right.
And actually, the Continental Gin Company was one of the largest manufacturers of cotton gins in the United States.
Goodness.
The Continental Gin Company.
So they were building the actual gins
They
themselves.
were building,
Okay.
they were building the gins.
They weren't. It wasn't cotton production. It was
exactly
okay.
in Texas and throughout the South. Obviously, cotton was big business,
Right.
and you needed a way to separate, the seeds from the cotton, and a cotton gin does exactly that.
Right.
So the Continental Gin Company was based right here in this building that we are sitting in right now. That is today the Culpeper Cattle
Oh,
Company.
thank you for that. You told me that before and I forgot. So thank you.
That's our tie-in. So
Okay.
that's our tie-in, and it was a thriving affair. Again, it was one of the largest manufacturers of cotton gins,
Right.
which was incredibly important throughout the United States
Right.
because it's cotton.
Right.
Almost everything, if
Especially
you're
at
wearing
that time.
clothing right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody who listens to our podcast is wearing clothing, but
Yes.
if
Yes.
you are wearing
I
clothing,
am.
you probably have some cotton on you.
Yeah.
But so in
Can I point there? So
Yeah,
it wasn't
please.
just. To me, that was important because it's not just. I don't know, cotton. Farming, processing, which is great, but it was actually almost beyond industrial. It was also manufacturing. Yes, sir.
Good, yeah. I think good for the moment.
Good for a moment. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
It was a really good example of this being. Just don't call it high tech, but think about this. This was true manufacturing of equipment, not just farming and processing. So, which brings sometimes requires a skilled labor force, right?
It does.
And created opportunities for maybe that population. So,
Agreed.
so I'm just thinking here
You are.
that this is pretty
Connecting
impressive
dots.
in a way.
Connect and dot.
Okay.
Bonus points if you can tell me who invented the cotton gin.
Was it Joe Gin?
No.
Okay.
No, it was
No,
not.
Eli Whitney.
Eli Whitney, exactly right. If you grew up in Texas or in Arkansas or any, I can't really speak to the other areas, but we learned very early on that Eli Whitney was the inventor.
He
of
was
the
like a
cotton gin.
hero.
Yeah,
He's right up
absolutely.
there with George Washington.
Right, there's George Washington and then
And
Eli. Whitney.
Eli. Yeah, he's a founding father, wasn't
That's
he?
right. That's right. Oh, that noise would have been Bob getting so excited at his own joke that his microphone fell in his lap. So,
I caught it.
but so in 1888, a guy by the name of Robert Munger, okay, Munger,
Okay.
moved to the Dallas area. He was an inventor, a mechanical innovator that came from Mejia,
Okay.
Mejia, Texas.
Okay.
Not only was cotton a huge import, but Anna Nicole Smith also a huge export, rather, from Mejia, Texas. That's where Anna Nicole Smith
Okay.
was from.
All right. There's a tie-in.
Again, I'm dating myself,
Right.
but But so Robert Munger moves to Dallas,
Right.
and he built the factory in which we are currently sitting. In 1983, it's added to the National Register of Historic Places. So, that does shine a light
Right.
on the criticality of the Continental Gin Company to a number of different things that we're going to get into a little bit later. But this complex, Continental Gin, grew in phases over the ensuing decades.
Right.
So, again, the first building is built in 1888. The company was so incredibly successful that it ends up merging with several rivals.
Wow.
And by 1900, it's the nation's biggest gin manufacturer.
My God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing.
All here in Deep Ellum, where we are. Okay.
Exactly. Right on the ground in which we're sitting.
Right.
And at one point, nearly 1/6 of the world's cotton was grown within a 150-mile radius of where these machines were made. So that's how big cotton was in this immediate area and why it's so important.
Still is. I don't know if you've driven across the panhandle of Texas or West Texas lately, but it's still amazing to me whenever you drive out that direction. You see all these cotton farms and just, so it makes sense.
The conditions are right. I mean,
right. Whatever it is, it works.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Cool, man. Well, that's impressive.
Yeah. So I'm going to go off on a little bit of a side tangent for a moment.
Well, we're used to that.
where I just kind of meander.
I'll be over here, Lee. You just keep on going, baby.
Right. Well, thank you. So you remember the house that I lived in on Worth?
Yes.
So that house was actually in Munger Place.
Ah.
And Munger Place was developed by Robert Munger starting in 1905.
Right.
So the very guy that actually really established the roots of Deep Ellum.
Right.
Also established the neighborhood in which I lived.
Wow.
It was one of the first deed-restricted neighborhoods in Dallas, meaning you had requirements around what you could and could not have. And as you look at that Munger Place neighborhood in Dallas today, you still see that.
Right.
The homes had to be 2 stories. They had to have a setback from the street. So you had to have a front yard. You had to have porches that were all aligned so that you could see your neighbors. So as I would sit on my front porch, I could look to the right and I could see through a tunnel of porches all the way down to either end of the street.
That to me, that's very fun. But let me ask you, and I'm probably getting ahead of us here, but there seems to be a contrast between the Munger neighborhood, right? It has deed restrictions or it has certain constraints and requirements, and there's a versus where Munger built the business here in Deep Ellum, which I assume is maybe not the opposite, but close to it. And that Deep Ellum was a free flowing, neighborhood that had a different spirit to it. Right. So it's not a criticism. It's interesting to see the contrast where kind of what he created and then, where he lived and all that's understandable, but it's interesting.
Well, so it is interesting. And here's something that is also interesting about that time. I couldn't necessarily uncover whether or not Robert Munger lived there in Munger Place himself.
Okay.
You got to keep in mind, he was an industrialist, not a social person.
Okay.
He was not like a society figure or anything like that.
Right.
And this is before the era where Dallas really began to celebrate tycoons.
Yeah.
So his activities, where he lived, things like that, they didn't make it into newspaper articles.
Right.
They didn't. Things like that weren't documented. So there's not a lot of information about him, where he lived, whether or not he actually lived in Munger Place or if it was just.
You're right. So he was he was an established person within the community. He had a lot of obviously power at some time. And then there was recognition of him later, and it could be just the naming of the neighborhood. Okay.
Looking back, so it was initially called Munger Place. There goes Bob's microphone again. It was initially called Munger Place, so we know that he had involvement there.
Right.
But we know where he worked, we know what he built, but where he lived seems to have kind of faded from history.
Right.
So,
just keep going.
Well, I plan to. Wow, okay. When everybody's getting hip to the point now. When Bob says that, he's bored. He wants to get to the next topic. So here we go.
I find this fascinating.
But I want to reiterate. So Munger Place. Deep Ellum was established because of the rails
Right.
and the gin companies that served the cotton community
Right.
and helped export cotton. Well, helped
So
clean and export cotton all around the country, if not the world.
that's important to understand. And I really, you did capture it well. So from a timelines perspective, that really begins 1880s, 90s, early 1900s. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, the consolidation of multiple different gin manufacturing companies occurs in 1899. So right at the turn of the century.
Right.
And the Continental Gin Company remains a power player until World War II and a little bit beyond. It starts kind of tapering off after that, and ultimately it shutters its doors in 1962.
Okay.
But you can say from 1880 to 1960.
So think that duration is really very, very impressive.
70 years.
Right. It's core.
Yeah. Without a doubt. So, okay, let's get back to Deep Ellum here. And we're going to talk about another industrial chapter.
Okay.
So, and this one is also 100% tied to those intersecting railroads.
Okay.
So what is we mentioned, so the cotton gin business was huge. What else came to Dallas in, we'll call it we won't call it, we'll call it 1914. I'll even give you that. A large company comes to town in 1914.
You're really not setting yourself up to ask me this question because I'm going to get this right.
Uh-oh. He's done his research, kids.
Do you want to continue? You want me to give you the answer?
Yes. Which company was that, Bob?
There was this guy named Henry Ford.
That's exactly right.
Impressive, huh?
Very nice.
Yes.
So he actually built one of the earliest knockdown assembly plants for the Model T here in Dallas in 1914.
Okay.
So what's a knockdown facility, you might ask?
I do.
So parts would be shipped. They would be manufactured and assembled in Detroit.
Right.
So you would have an engine, you would have seats, you would have a chassis, you would have, all these different components, but they wouldn't be assembled until they actually got to a knockdown plant.
Well, why did they do we know why they called it knockdown, or what was the term knockdown?
My research doesn't indicate such, Bob. I can't answer that question.
I knew that. That's why I asked.
Yeah, he's trying to trap me.
Yeah.
He wants to look good. He wants to get the A on all the questions, and he wants to set me up for failure.
You do understand that I'm not having to do anything. I'm just sitting here commenting. So it's just riding along. Yes, I do a flyby. Yeah,
that's right. No, but so regardless of why the name came up, and if anybody happens to know the name or the reason that it was called Knockdown Plant, put it in the comments, send us an email. We would love to know.
Yep.
But so the parts are shipped in by rail from Detroit. The workers on Elm Street here, there's a building known as the Adam Hatt Building. It's now Lofts.
Right.
That's where the Ford facility was back in 1914 when it opened up.
I mean, that's like 2 blocks over.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's right here.
It's right around the corner.
Sure.
So these weren't massive manufacturing plants. Again, they were just really where you would bolt together the large components.
Yeah.
And then you would ship them out to important regional hubs for sale.
So do you have a feel or an understanding of why Ford decided to do this here in Dallas?
Same thing. I mean, it was
just
thing.
To get regional presence.
It's the intersection of the two railroads.
Okay.
Yep. It's a logistical matter. You can get things north and south. You can get them east and west.
Expand the reach of it.
So
of course.
That's exactly it.
All right.
Now, there's not a lot of information about why this occurs, but by 1920, that plant has been shuttered.
Wow.
So now other knockdown plants continued in the region.
I wonder if that was just to get the cars and the autos out into the marketplace.
I think that it was.
Okay.
I think that it certainly was.
Okay.
And maybe labor was cheaper. There was a knockdown plant in Oklahoma City. Maybe labor was cheaper there. I simply don't know the answer to that.
Yep.
But other knockdown facilities continued to exist. But by 1920, the Dallas knockdown plant for Ford was shuttered.
Right. Okay.
So, and one little bonus tidbit: Henry Ford never. It's not documented, but it appears as though he never came to Dallas to visit the plant.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there wouldn't.
Well, that's not great, but I said it was great because the guy just brought us our drinks. So there's that.
There is
I'm
that.
sorry, I got distracted, Lee.
Right, it
It's a
happens.
fascinating story.
But you're right, yeah. It's so much so that a beverage can actually distract you from it.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was no ceremony, there was no ribbon cutting. This was just simply a logistical affair. I keep going back to the logistics
Right.
of Deep Ellum. But the system worked so well that Ford didn't even need to come down here and check it out.
Yeah.
So it's apparently he
Good,
was never here.
but it does point to your original point, and that is the importance of the railways. And I guess you think about history overall and where cities were formed and built and typically on the coastal regions, then the rivers were important.
Mhm.
And then railways, tremendous impact on formation of cities and where neighborhoods were developed and labor could come in and everything you talked about. And that's Dallas is not on the Trinity River, and it's no raging. Yeah, and there's a whole story. There's a whole story there.
Deep
I know.
Ellum is actually kind of far away from where that area was.
Exactly.
I mean, it wasn't the river that was influencing Deep Ellum's establishment.
Right.
It truly was the rail.
So the fact that these railroads crossed, for the most part, created this logistics hub, and it just propelled into what we now know is not only Dallas, but specifically what we're talking about today is Deep Ellum. So, and to me, that is really important to understand. So,
yeah. So, today's podcast is covering from roughly 1870 to 1920.
Okay.
The history of Deep Ellum. So we're coming close to the end of the initial section here.
Okay.
But there are a couple of things that I want to talk about. So, obviously, World War I. When we're looking at 1920 as the end for this first episode here on Deep Ellum, World War I is a good solid cutoff point. And when World War I breaks out, Deep Ellum had a massive part in that. However, it didn't send tanks, it didn't send munitions, it didn't send things like that. It sent infrastructure.
Really?
So again, because of cotton and how big it was, Deep Ellum played a massive part in providing uniforms, providing canvas, providing bandages, anything that the war effort required. The Continental Gin Company was part of helping to continue the flow of those things to support the war effort. Warehouses were filled. Patriotism was all over the place.
Fever pitch,
even in these industrial districts. So, people really rallied. There's a very diverse culture here in Deep Ellum by this point.
Right.
But
at that point, the armed forces had not been integrated, correct? So you were still dealing with that segregation. So
exactly, yes, and that's what I was going to say. So everyone is looking to support the war effort, but Deep Ellum remained segregated. It remained unequal.
Right.
In spite of the fact that everyone wanted to pull together and support that war effort.
Right.
So, the war years really hardened the workforce. And it crystallized, it set the stage for the cultural changes that begin with our next episode. We're going to talk about.
Sure. Right.
But, we can't finish talking about this industrial era of Deep Ellum without acknowledging something it's ugly, but it's important.
Okay.
Right? So a heads up for some of our sensitive listeners, what we're about to talk about
I'm sensitive.
It's true. What we're about to talk about is tough to hear. But it's a part of Dallas history, and it certainly should not be ignored. As these factories boomed here, the racial tensions boomed as well. They grew to the point where they exploded.
Yeah.
In 1910, there's a lynching that occurs in downtown Dallas, not far from where we are right now, near the site of what is today the old red brick courthouse.
Okay.
There was a 20-year-old black man who his name was Alan Brooks, and his story really highlights the fact that prosperity here in Deep Ellum did not guarantee racial safety or equality.
Sure. Right.
I'm not going to get into the details of the crime of which he was accused, because unfortunately his innocence and guilt was never proven. He didn't get that opportunity.
Right.
So In 1910, he's arrested. He's taken to this Dallas County courthouse at the time.
Right.
A mob of between 5 and 10,000 people shows up. This is documented.
Right.
The sheriff and other authorities made no attempt to disperse the crowd. Any effort at crowd control was non-existent.
Right.
And the mob soon overpowers law enforcement, and they storm the courthouse.
Wow.
Brooks was on the second floor of this courthouse. They found him.
Right.
They threw him out a window.
Oh my goodness. Floor. Yeah.
They dragged him down the street and they lynched him at the corner of Main and Akron.
Wow, my goodness.
Well, this happened midday with thousands of people watching.
Right.
And nobody did a single thing to stop it.
Yeah.
That was indicative of what things were like. The tensions.
You got this.
I call those tensions. That seems like.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what word to use.
No, and it's beyond friction. It's beyond tensions. It's obviously it's not just, but it's I think it's important for you to reflect that or to talk about it, because a lot of Deep Ellum is about culture and about the division between what the people in power, which was obviously, the white establishment that across the U.S. at that time, and the people that just tried to survive, and not only survive and thrive. And sometimes I wonder, Deep Ellum was thriving at some level of this mixed community, but the African American base was the prominent.
Was the lifeblood.
Was the life. Yep. And it makes you wonder, because as I understand it, Deep Ellum was not only for the mixed community as well, but it also was a place for Anglos, white people, to also visit, have some enjoyment, but they would normally then leave. Okay, so it was almost being used, and some of that, and that's probably not a proper word, but you had, I think, this understanding in society and culture at the time, as long as you stayed within a certain area, you're okay. And it's always interesting that a fun culture that we're going to talk about more, such as Deep Ellum, as it evolved, was handy when you wanted it.
Yep.
Right? But when you didn't, it was convenient to attach blame to people. And it's I think the ultimate and power play is you can pick and choose when you like something.
Right.
And I just, to me, it's just indicative of that. And we can get more into some of this.
And we will.
Okay.
Yeah, we absolutely will in our next episode. But, I think what you're talking about occurs more after the 20s.
Right.
Where you've got that, we'll call it dilettantism. You're going down to a blues club to listen.
Well,
to
you're going to be hip,
Hip
as
in
a
the
white
20s.
guy, one of the best ways of being hip is you say, oh man, I listen
Smoke
to
those jazz cigarettes.
Yeah. Right. It's a nice thing.
That's true. It's true. So, that's, you're absolutely right though. There's, for the most part in the era that we're talking about up until World War I, the end of World War I, this was a workplace, right? And then
that's important to understand. I agree.
Right. So the cultural scene wasn't necessarily there yet. So that cultural tourism, that dilettantism, didn't necessarily exist until we get to.
Okay.
However, it
setting the
pops up
stage.
as prominent. Yes,
setting the
exactly.
stage.
Setting the stage is a good way to put it.
Okay.
So let's go back to Alan Brooks for a minute. So afterwards, unfortunately, nobody is prosecuted. A grand jury was convened, which was not always even the case.
That's actually surprising. But I have my own perspectives of maybe what things were like. So yeah.
So, but the grand jury, they refused to act, saying that they had they cited an inability to identify the perpetrators. When you've got a crowd of 5,000 to 10,000 people, I can understand that, but I feel as though you probably had a few people that stood out. But,
yeah.
So here's the thing. So this lynching made national news.
Okay.
National.
All right.
And it was a huge embarrassment for Dallas, which then was trying to brand itself as a modern progressive city.
Yeah, right. We talked about that in previous podcasts as well.
Yep.
Anatole and
Exactly. When
the bushes and
sorry, Adolphus. You mentioned Anatole.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's because I'm. You don't have to go into why he mentioned Anatole.
Lee is in the Anatole right now.
Yeah, we had a pipe burst at our home because of the recent ice storm, and so my wife and I are currently residing at the Anatole Hotel. So that's why it's top of mind for Bob. But in the Adolphus episode, we did touch on some of these things.
Right.
Unfortunately, in response, civic leaders focused not on punishment around these things, but they focused on preventing future embarrassments.
Yeah.
So they chose respectability over reform.
Okay.
Which is not necessarily an uncommon theme. It's not unique to Dallas.
No.
But it is more about managing optics than ensuring racial justice.
I think the really troubling thing is at that time is that you had such a crowd that was such angry, such a magnitude.
Right.
Yes, the fact that we had that the lynching is horrible, but the fact you had that many people that were that angry and had preconceived notions whom they wanted to blame and were probably okay, not all of them, but some were okay with the justice that
was meted out.
Yeah. That is disturbing, but it's a reflection of the times, right? So, yes,
it's not an excuse; it's an explanation.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Well, it's as bothersome as the lack of justice to me.
Definitely.
Is that furor that was,
and it was the optics that were driving any sort of change.
As justice sometimes relies on, optics is important, and that's people.
As a result, lynchings did become, they were phased out, if you want to call it that. It's not like they were, but they became more of a thing of the past. They did not occur as often, but don't mistake that.
Phased out in this region or just
here in Dallas in particular.
Okay.
There were fewer and fewer.
Okay.
But racial violence continued.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course. Well, in many forms. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
So here's the thing. There was a lot of news just a few years ago in Dallas around the fact that a plaque had been erected to acknowledge, to recognize what had occurred with the Allen Brooks lynching.
Right.
So in 2021, 111 years after the incident occurred, the city of Dallas finally put up a plaque that recognizes this dark part of its history.
Right.
And that plaque can be seen over by the old Red Courthouse now.
Yeah.
So, out of these tensions, though, the foundation of the cultural explosion that Bob's going to talk about in our next episode really begins to evolve.
Yeah.
So the Knights of Pythias Temple, which was designed by the first
Am I talking
black
about that?
architects.
Okay.
You are going to talk about that. I'm not going to give away anything. But
no, please go ahead. I don't know if I'm prepared.
Yes. But in the next episode, so you don't have to do it today. But yeah, so that was designed by the first black architect here in the certified black architect in the state of Texas. It's an amazing building. It's beautiful. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But fraternal organizations, there's a local chapter of the NAACP came in.
Yeah.
So Deep Ellum Life became more than just a workplace for the African American community. It became a place where Black Dallas built a civic life on its own terms.
And we're going to see more of this. It became a place not only for Dallas, but it became nationally recognized as a place for the Black community and others to continue to experience and celebrate life, right? So I think that's going to be very important.
Yeah,
so
without a doubt. So, we're going to talk about how the context that I've established today really matters when the music boom gets underway, beginning in the 1920s.
Right.
But before we wrap up today, I want to highlight the fact that the evolution of Deep Ellum was not at all accidental. It was a product of railroads.
Right.
It was industrial innovation, entrepreneurial energy.
Right.
And overall racial tension, contradictions.
Yeah.
Any number of things.
It's
signifies-
segregation and integration. It was a combination. Segregation, as we talked about, but integration of people that felt like they were outcast for whatever reason within the community would just created a certain level of energy that is hard to match, right?
Yeah.
So
I
think that's very important to understand.
And just the complexities of how, this is a little bit of a microcosm of how industry evolved over the years. We're looking at Deep Ellum, but this is not unique to Deep Ellum. This is what was happening in cities around the country.
Yeah.
We're just talking about Deep Ellum, but we talk about, our podcast is deep history, right? Places always have a story that's way deeper than its vibe.
That's right.
And Deep Ellum has industrial bones to it.
Yeah.
The cotton machines, those railroads, those assembly lines that Ford brought in.
Right.
But the exciting thing is what comes next.
Yeah.
And that's the cultural powerhouse, the boom, the explosion that you're going to tell us all about.
Well, and it's a direct result of people coming together that need to make a living.
Yeah.
In the day, you got to survive and you got to have life. And then out of that, both pain, suffering, and joy, create some of these cultural things that were very impressive. So, Lee, you did a great job.
Thank you.
This is very impressive. Mine is going to be much lighter than that.
I don't know about that.
Not from the story perspective, but mostly just from a volume perspective.
Well, you've got a tighter time frame to deal with. I think we're dealing with 20s to World War II.
I think 1920 to 1920 July. So I'm going for 6 months of intensity.
Covered 6 months.
But this is really good, and I think it sets the stage for a great conversation because you really explain a foundation and why to have culture and art, you got to have something livable, right? And I think that's a really good point. With all the tensions that you talked about, it's incredible.
And those, when that music comes later, just know that foundation had been there for a very long time.
Right. Thank you for that.
You bet. All right,
man. So let's order some buffet or something.
I'm
hungry.
I am hungry. All right.
Let's go.
See you next time, everyone.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Today we talked about the early days of Deep Ellum. In our next episode, Bob is going to take us even deeper into the 20th century and connect the dots between the Deep Ellum that was and the Deep Ellum you know today. I'm probably overselling it, so temper your expectations. And by the way, thanks for digging in with us. We're still figuring this out, and we appreciate you for sticking with us as we find our voice and style. If you enjoyed the episode, let us know what you liked. And don't forget that you can help us uncover even more ears by rating and reviewing Deep History wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you know. Finally, if you've got a weird fact, buried story, or historical rabbit hole you think we should go down, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep digging.